Most people hear the phrase the Silence Doctrine and assume it is metaphor. It isn't. It is operating logic. A set of rules this county has learned so well that most people no longer hear them as rules at all. They hear them as professionalism, tradition, process, the way things are. Tonight, I want to name the first 3 rules cleanly, because once you understand these 3, the rest of Hunt County starts making a lot more sense, not morally, mechanically. The first rule is this: silence is currency. The second is this: noise is theater. And the third is this: loyalty outweighs competence. That is the doctrine in its most usable form. Rule 1: silence is currency. In Hunt County, the most valuable thing you can own is not land, not title, not office, not influence. It is what you do not say. Silence buys time. Time buys leverage. Leverage buys everything else. That is the exchange rate underneath this county's public life. People like to think silence is passive. It isn't. Silence is stored value. Silence is delay converted into power. Silence is what lets a room keep breathing long enough to decide how much truth it can afford. Because the second a fact gets stated plainly, the room has to start spending. Spending language, spending legitimacy, spending political oxygen, spending credibility it would rather keep in reserve for the next crisis, the next vote, the next bond pitch, the next smiling public statement. That is why silence matters so much here. Not because nobody knows, because too many people know exactly how expensive honesty can become once it enters the room in plain English. That is the first arithmetic of the doctrine. Not what happened, what could be made affordable by refusing to name it yet. That is why public language here always arrives so moisturized, so softened, so carefully buffered. The county is not only protecting itself from scandal, it is protecting the market value of silence. Rule 2: noise is theater. Every county knows how to make noise. Ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, community celebrations, leadership profiles, glossy updates about progress, partnership, growth, and vision. Not all of it is false. That is what makes it useful. Because noise doesn't have to be fake to function as cover. It just has to be timed correctly. While you are watching the ceremony, signatures are drying somewhere else. While the room is smiling for the camera, somebody is narrowing the language, adjusting the sequence, moving the burden, calculating what can safely be admitted now and what still needs another week, another month, another layer of polish before the public sees it. That is what spectacle is for. Static. Noise is not accidental here. Noise is cheaper than explanation. And that is why the louder the celebration gets, the more carefully you should ask what silence it is protecting. Crowds are emotional. Emotion is easy to stage, and emotional people rarely cross-reference a packet in the parking lot on the way home from a photo op. That is the county's second habit. Create enough movement that the public mistakes it for transparency. Create enough ceremony that the audience walks away feeling informed, even when the only thing they were actually given was atmosphere. That is why so many official statements sound so polished and say so little. The noise is doing work. It is keeping your attention occupied while the real transaction finishes in another room. Rule 3: loyalty outweighs competence. This one makes people especially uncomfortable because it explains too much too quickly. In systems governed by silence, skill is useful, loyalty is essential. Competence can expose weakness. Competence can remember too accurately. Competence can ask the wrong follow-up. Competence can produce records too cleanly, react too quickly, and refuse the ritual of pretending that a failure was really just a communication issue with unfortunate optics. Loyalty conceals. Loyalty smooths. Loyalty waits. Loyalty understands the emotional economy of the room. Loyalty knows when not to clarify too soon. That is why the same faces keep rotating through different titles. Different office, same operator, different board, same posture, different logo, same social temperature. This is not always reward for success. Sometimes it's reward for survivability, for keeping the room intact when something went wrong, for absorbing the damage without making the structure answer too many questions, for understanding when to be useful, when to be quiet, and when to help the county pretend that the problem was never structural in the first place. That is doctrine, not accident. And once a county learns to prize that kind of loyalty, competence stops being a public virtue. It becomes something to manage. The useful person is no longer just the sharp one. It is the sharp one who knows how not to cut the room. That is why the doctrine survives. Because the county does not need everybody to be corrupt. It only needs enough people to understand the etiquette of survival. Keep the truth soft. Keep the spectacle bright. Keep the loyal close. That is usually enough to get from one quarter to the next without the public ever seeing the full cost clearly enough to revolt against it. So let's say the first 3 rules again. Silence is currency. Noise is theater. Loyalty outweighs competence. If you understand those 3, you understand why this county can look calm while something violent is happening administratively. You understand why polished public language so often arrives right when the truth should have come in plain clothes. You understand why the same names survive bad rooms, bad years, bad outcomes, and still somehow reappear with fresh titles and clean biographies. That isn't mystery, it's structure. And if you've lived here long enough, chances are you already know these rules. Maybe nobody ever handed you the manual. Maybe you learned it the hard way. At a kitchen table, in a boardroom, at a county meeting, in a hospital hallway, at the edge of a fire scene. But you know the temperature change. You know the pause before the answer. The careful wording, the smiling ceremony that somehow lands right on top of the wrong week. That's the doctrine working. My name is Cass Wakefield, and this is the Hunt County Signal. In the next part, we'll keep going, because these are only the first 3 rules. If there is a public document, statement, or local success story you want broken down in plain English, leave it in the comments. Because around here, the truth rarely disappears. It just gets taught better manners before it's allowed outside.